Plenty of car companies have promised an all-electric lineup, but few have delivered like Cadillac has. Today, we're out here in Northern California driving the new Optic. This is the smallest member of the family, and it slots one step below the Cadillac Lyriq. But also, we're going to be getting a Vistiq this year. That's a three-row EV designed to compete with the Volvo EX90 and the like. We also have the upcoming Cadillac Escalade IQ if you want one of the biggest EVs on sale in America. If that's not big enough, we're going to get the Escalade IQ-L, which is even bigger. Then, of course, we have the coach-built Cadillacs. We have the upcoming Soleil convertible, and then the Celestiq, which is already on sale right now. But in this video, let's talk about the smallest and the most affordable of Caddy's EVs. The new Optic and the Lyriq are close cousins, but the closest relative in the Ultium family of vehicles is, of course, the Chevy Equinox. Now, GM is trying to kind of dial away from the Ultium name, but it's probably the best way to still describe this general collection of vehicles, which again is going to include the upcoming three-row Vistiq. I'm really excited to drive that, but that's later this year. Now, in terms of design, this definitely looks like a member of the Cadillac family. Big Cadillac logo in the middle, the same sort of illuminated grille section that we find in the Lyriq, but certainly shrunken down for the Optic. We have these ice cube style LED headlights that I think are really attractive in this really big cascading headlight module. Lighting and angles are something that Cadillac has done really well lately. I think that's certainly the case for the Optic. I really like the progressive turn signal that we see there. With an overall length of around 190 inches from tip to tail, this is 6.7 inches shorter than the Cadillac Lyriq. And the big difference between the two happens in the back seat. Early numbers might have indicated that the Optic was actually about the same size inside as the Lyriq. That's not the case. The Lyriq is considerably larger inside, and you will notice that as a rear seat passenger, but also perhaps as a front seat passenger if you really want that seat moved all the way back. But there's certainly some synergy when it comes to the design. I think the Optic, as a result of its tighter dimensions, looks a little bit more upright and a little bit more traditional SUV than the Lyriq, which is a little bit of a wagon vibe going on, but we actually have a little less ground clearance, 6 inches here versus 7 inches in the Lyriq. We don't have the same style of powered charging door, but we still do have a powered charge door here, J1772 and the CCS charge port in there. General Motors has committed to the J3400 or NACS charging standard, but we aren't going to find that, at least this year, in any Cadillac EVs. We don't know about the upcoming Escalade IQ-L, but I did see the Escalade IQ in the studio, and that still had a CCS port. Out back, we have a very similar design theme to the Lyriq with this really sloping rear glass, this sort of etched glass panel in the side, giving it a little bit of extra flair. But let me know what you guys think about these door handles, because for me, they open in the opposite direction that I'm used to. Rather than flipping out from the back, they flip out from the front. It does mean that grabbing them, I think, is a little bit easier, and staying with your hand on that handle might be easier than some of the other designs, but it seems counterintuitive for some reason. Maybe that's just me. The model we're driving today has the 20-inch wheels, 245/50 R20 tires. The 50 series tire means that we have a little bit more cushion than average for a luxury EV, but if you want wider tires, those are available. You can go up to 275 width. I'm actually kind of surprised that Cadillac is not having us drive the models with the wider tires. Now let's take a look at the back end, because this is, again, very Lyriq-like with some changes. We have the cascading taillight modules separated. One's up here on top, and that long one is down there below, mimicking what we see in some other Cadillacs. But the brake light, that's just this one little slim thing right here at top. I should say the center brake light right there. We do not have a windshield wiper. That is the other thing that I was surprised by. Like some other EV manufacturers, Cadillac thinks that it's not necessary in this model because they have a spoiler up top with an air intake there. They think that helps wash over the rear glass, but I think I would prefer a rear wiper. The button for opening the hatch is the Cadillac logo itself, and as you can see, we have a decent amount of cargo capacity back here. Again, below the Lyriq, but above average for this particular segment. According to Cadillac, we get 26 cubic feet of storage space back here, certainly enough for some of those larger roller bags if they're well aligned, but no spare tire. Under here, we do find some additional storage space, a place to put your charge cord, your Can-A-Fix-A-Flat, the tow hook, etc. But importantly, we do not have a front trunk in here. And that's because when designing this platform, like the other associated EVs on this platform, they wanted to really improve the interior volume and the cargo space in the back. And that meant giving this a relatively short hood profile compared to something like a Tesla Model Y. It's longer than something like a Genesis GV60, of course, but they also located all the charging electronics here under the hood. By putting all the drive and charge electronics up front, they are able to give us a bit more cargo space in the back. We have a heat pump under here as well. And this is partially because every model is going to have a front motor. There's no rear-wheel drive version of the Optic. And importantly, there's no front-wheel drive version of the Optic either, but the bigger motor is up front. And that means this is quite different than something like the Genesis electric vehicles that you might want to be cross-shopping against the Optic. We have 300 horsepower total, approximately 220 horsepower or so is happening up front, and the rest of the power is happening on the back. Cadillac did not have official individual motor specifications for us today, unfortunately, so hopefully on the side of your screen, you'll see those final numbers. Now, charging, again, happens right here behind door number 6, and if you have access to a 19.2 kilowatt EVSE at home, if I can pull this plug out, you could actually charge this battery via that optional charger. Standard, we have an 11.5 kilowatt charger, but if you're really worried about charging your battery very rapidly at home or at the office, you do have that option here. The DC fast charging, that's something we should talk about. This has the same 85 kilowatt hour battery pack as our long-term Chevy Blazer EV, and of course the Equinox EV. That means that if you take this to a DC fast charge station, it will peak at 150 kilowatts. That is not going to set anybody's hair on fire. And in order to get the 150 kilowatt peak rate, you will actually have to plug into a 350 kilowatt CCS station by and large. And that's because this is a very low voltage, high current battery pack, which is the opposite of what we're seeing in Lucids and some other Hyundai Kia vehicles, etc. And that simply means you need those stations that can support 500 plus amps. Of course, the Tesla charging network can do that, and GM does have access to the Tesla superchargers via an adapter. As we look around the Optic, keep in mind that Cadillac has decided to make every model really well equipped. Not only is all-wheel drive standard, their complete suite of active driver assist and active safety tech is standard as well, including Cadillac's Super Cruise system. That was kind of a surprise for me because this is one of the few models that has that ADAS feature absolutely standard. It uses a combination of cameras all around the vehicle and of course a radar module positioned nice and low in the front end of the vehicle to give you hands off the wheel steering and driving on hundreds of thousands of miles of roadway in North America. There's been a lot of talk about autonomy or semi-autonomy lately, but if you're looking for the best hands off the wheel steering system available in North America, it is Super Cruise, and it is standard on this. Well, it is still optional, oddly enough, on the bigger Lyriq. Now let's check out the inside, first starting with the door handle, which again, I find actually quite useful. Just visually, I think it should go the other way for some reason. But hopping inside, some of you will be happy to know, and some of you will be disappointed to know that the seating position and seat comfort and just the way that it's shaped is a scale version of what we find in the Lyriq. So if you don't find the seats in the Lyriq to be terribly comfortable, I wish we had a lot more leg support, then you aren't going to like the ones in the Optic, because this is basically the same format, slightly shrunken here. And very similar to the Lyriq, we have the seat controls over here on the driver's door. So this controls the massage, the lumbar support. We then have the seat back, seat bottom cushion, heating and ventilation, and memory settings. This bottom button, that's the easy access seat, so you can have it scoot back. We don't have a powered tilt telescopic steering column, but we do have a manual model that does have a pretty decent range of motion, but because we have this huge screen that you're going to see in a second, the steering wheel is always going to be blocking some part of that driver display. Now let's check out the back seat. With that front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, let's see how things go back here. This is the one area where you're going to notice, again, a big difference between this and the Lyriq. We have about 5 inches or so less legroom. You can see I still have a pretty decent amount of room there. If I scoot all the way over to the right side, this seat's further back in its tracks, still have a lot of legroom left. Even though this is smaller than the Lyriq on the inside, it still is one of the roomier EVs out there, and that's something that we see in the related Equinox as well. We have a nearly flat floor. It just has a very gentle bump up for some of the battery cables, etc. We have USB-C charge ports, heated rear seats, and air vents in this model, and an onboard inverter outlet right there in the center console. As far as child seats go, roominess is pretty decent. I suspect you would be able to put a child seat behind a driver, but if you are debating between this and the Chevy, keep in mind the design of this front seat back is going to actually impede installing a child seat because we have this chunkier solid section there. Latch anchors, they're easy to get to. These are the kind with these little plastic doors. You can remove them if you want to, but I think they might get lost more easily. We also have a shoulder belt that comes out of the seat back itself, really centering those child seats, and a big armrest with 2 cup holders there. And then lastly, if I click this button, we have a big panoramic moonroof that goes to just about the rear passengers' heads. But perhaps because of the way this panoramic moonroof is designed and where that shade is going, headroom is a little precious in the back, meaning I just don't have enough to actually sit upright with my head on that rear head restraint. If you're kind of sitting in a more natural format, it's going to be okay. My hair is brushing the ceiling, but it could be a little roomier, a little bit more comfortable. Now, on the seat recline front, these fold forward almost flat with the cargo area in the back, and it's a 60/40 design without a ski pass-through. Now let's check out the inside. Up here we have a digital rear view mirror. We have the controls for the sunshade. The moonroof does not open, but it does have a powered shade. OnStar buttons, interior camera. We have sun visors that slide to the side and have vanity mirrors and lights on both sides. We then have the AKG ceiling speakers because this does have the up-level Dolby Atmos system by AKG, and it does sound absolutely fantastic, I have to say. We have this big panoramic moonroof. You can see that Travis is back there demonstrating the headroom or perhaps lack thereof. Moving up to the front, let's check out these headrests here. These are a two-way design, so they do not move forward and backward, and they're definitely on the chunky side. So if you like something that wraps around to the side, you're gonna like that. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for the driver and front passenger, and there are a number of different interior color options. I think this interior color, the blue and the sort of chestnut brown, are probably my favorite. But I love the fact that Cadillac is inserting extra color into their interiors lately. These seats are pretty light colored. They're almost white. They're heated and ventilated with kind of an eccentric pattern running down there. But we have a blue stripe right in the middle of everything. You can see that right there. And then we have the blue accents on the doors and on the dashboard. This intersection is kind of a carpety felt. We then have a blue plastic insert there, the AKG speaker grills down there on the door, soft touch materials for the most part there. Fabric on top of the door and on the dashboard. I think that is a touch that I hadn't expected, but I really, really appreciate here. And then soft touch materials all across the dashboard as well. This upper section is a rubbery plastic, but it is soft. And then we have hard plastics at the very, very top of the dashboard that run across that speaker grille, including the left and right speakers and the big center speaker there also. The air vents are somewhat similar to the ones in the Cadillac Lyriq. The knob rotates around to open and close the vent, and you can see the little fin inside moving. We have more of that fabric going on right there. The release for the glove compartment is in the touchscreen infotainment system. We have the same sort of enormous single LCD across the dashboard that we find in other Cadillac models, and I think this looks fantastic. The only thing missing, of course, is Apple CarPlay. Because this is a Cadillac EV, we don't get that feature. And that is another thing that I really wish Cadillac would give in to, because it really limits customer choice, and survey after survey after survey indicate that customers really want CarPlay and Android Auto, and you don't get either of those features in this system. However, you do get the latest Google integrated software, including online mapping, traffic information, the ability to download apps like Waze and the Amazon Music system, Tidal, etc. I should note that for the Dolby Atmos system, if you want to listen to Atmos music, you have to use Amazon Music or Tidal, or coming a little bit later, you'll be able to use a USB key with songs on it. You will not be able to use Bluetooth, and even though it would be or could be supported with wireless CarPlay, it's not going to be supported because there is no CarPlay. So we don't get that additional bandwidth in order to make that work. So no Bluetooth sources. Here we have the same sort of trim panel that we had on the doors. It's a blue plastic strip, and if you look closely, it has some kind of charcoal pixels in there. I think that's kind of an intriguing look. We get the piano key controls for the climate control system. Cadillac's really staying dedicated to those digital controls. We have a storage bin down here. You could easily put things like your big smartphone in that storage bin. It's coated with the same fabric as the door pockets and as this big storage area under the center console. It's a little bit difficult to see here, but that is all lined with that same fabric, and it's big enough to store things like larger bags, purses, things like that in. Back up here on the center console, we have more fabric wrapping all the way around the console. This model has what kind of looks like carbon fiber, but I think it's actually the same fabric under the epoxy for this upper section. You can also get wood trim, or I should say a paper trim interior. It looks like wood, but it's actually recycled newspaper that's been dyed and cut in an angle. That's a really cool look. Up here we have a small slot where you can store your key. That's what the key looks like, in case you're wondering. Controls for the infotainment system. You can use the touchscreen or this rotary knob and buttons. That black plastic's probably going to scratch though. 2 big cup holders over there and a decently sized storage area in the middle. There's a button on the side, none on the passenger side. So it just opens towards the driver right like that. This is where we find a Qi wireless charging mat, a removable storage tier, extra storage space there with some USB charge ports, and this is where we find the 12-volt power port right there. Back on the driver's side, again, we find this big touchscreen LCD that runs across the dashboard. And yes, it is a touchscreen running across the dash, even though this gauge cluster section is obviously not touch enabled. That wouldn't make much sense, but that gives us this touch functionality you'll see over here on the left side, so you can change the look of the gauge cluster. You can get a full moving map display. You can tap it again, and you can get your trip computer, HUD controls, etc. All that's available. But you will notice that not all of this LCD is really that usable for the driver necessarily, because depending on where the steering wheel is positioned, it's always going to cover at least some portion of the display. And if you're trying to put things like your drive mode or information, or sorry, your trip computer information on one of the quadrants of the display, as is an option, it actually may get covered by the steering wheel. On the other hand, I like the positioning of the readout for Super Cruise. You can see these little lights here. Those are part of the driver monitoring system. We then have a big LED bar running inside there to tell you the status of Super Cruise, and then a more discreet driver monitoring module than we find in a lot of vehicles with hands-off the wheel systems. Not only is this a little bit slimmer and cleaner looking for the driver monitoring and readout system, it's also in your eye line. So if you're driving, you're going to be looking kind of like this, and this LED bar is in the same eye line as your head-up display, and it's going to be a lot easier for the system to tell you, hey, you need to take control over the steering. Moving down from there, speaking about steering, this is the same Cadillac wheel that we find in a wide variety of models, so more shiny black plastic that's probably going to scratch, and that's important around features like your cruise control, your heated steering wheel button over there, and track up, down, volume up, down, because those are on the face of the wheel rather than on the back of the wheel like in other GM vehicles. And there's another black insert down there. On the other hand, the steering wheel is a nice chunky grip, and I think it's actually really comfortable for longer drives. We have a single paddle on the back of the wheel. This does not adjust the throttle lift-off regen. This is a simple regen paddle, so the harder you pull it, the more regen you get. It is variable. It's not just an on-off switch. You can see the switch gear behind that. That's the turn signal and windshield wiper stalk. The shifter, that's over there on the right side. And in case you're wondering, we do have one pedal driving, but it's adjusted over here in the infotainment system. So Travis, 300 horsepower, we should probably talk about numbers and the way those ponies come online here.
Yeah, I mean, on paper, 300 is plenty. And when you're driving around, it feels like there's plenty. But what this doesn't do a great job of is giving you that power right away. It rolls on pretty slowly.
Yeah, it takes till you hit about 30 miles per hour until all 300 horsepower are on the boil. That's relatively respectable compared to a lot of mainstream EVs. Yeah. It is a little surprising for some luxury EVs though, because Genesis definitely rolls on their power a little bit quicker in some of their models. But this is faster than most of the Cadillac lineup, really.
It is, and it's not going to be one of those things where it's like, not to throw anyone too under the bus, but like Nissan Ariya levels of acceleration, roll up. But you're not going to be able to get it faster than this because there's one powertrain, so hopefully 300 is good for you. It's great for passing power, that's for sure.
And your actual 0 to 60 time is going to depend on the mode you're in, because if we're in, what is this called here, relaxed or tour, we get a slower ramp up to 300 horsepower. We still get 300 horsepower total, but that ramp time is a little bit longer. In the sport mode, you get maximum power at about 30 miles an hour. We're in the relaxed mode, so let's see how long this takes. 35. So it takes a little bit longer.
Yeah.
0 to 60 in our initial testing out here ranged between 5.9 and 6.3 seconds. That's probably what we're going to get once we get this at home.
Yeah, more often than not, you're going to be just above 6. But again, when you're out and already moving, it's going to feel peppier than that 0 to 60 is going to lend itself to.
Yeah, it's an electric car, so no shifting, etc. Definitely has that nice pep. Also, the stopping distance was pretty decent, even accounting for the curb weight and the fact that we have the narrower tires on this model. We stopped from 60 miles an hour back to 0 in 121 feet.
I fully suspect that if we got the bigger wheel and tire package, those are going to also be probably some stickier tires that we would be lower than that, but I was pleasantly surprised.
Also on the number front, we should talk efficiency and talk about the fact that we probably have not been driving this efficiently.
No, we are not in the best area to get a good number on that, but
Right.
we can speak in relative terms.
We've been averaging 2 miles per kilowatt hour. I'm going to go ahead and guess this is going to get well better than that, or significantly better than that, rather, when we can drive this on a more consistent, more sedate road. We will have a different number up there on the top of your screen if we can get a combined average for the day, once we can, stop driving this on hills and stop 0 to 60 testing it.
Yeah, and I fully suspect that this is going to be right in line with what we get with an Equinox, because we get very similar size, shape, weight's a little bit more, but that shouldn't be too bad once you get this thing rolling.
I will say efficiency has not been the forte of the Ultium family of vehicles so far, mainly seemingly because of their curb weight. But on the other hand, I think the curb weight makes this feel like a Cadillac.
It rides pretty nicely. This is going to be the more agile, sportier variant of this Cadillac lineup, this new electrified Cadillac lineup. And I think it does a pretty good job of balancing fun to drive, but also still being comfortable. And that's something you do not want to lose in your Cadillac, is your everyday driving comfort.
But back to the Cadillac, I think that the curb weight sort of helps the feel in a way. It does have that slightly bouncy feel that we get in some EVs, but it's muted by the fact that we get those higher profile tires that are going to be a little bit more comfortable. We have a slightly softer suspension tune than we certainly find in a lot of Tesla models. Yep. If you're looking for something that rides more comfortably, still has a lot of passing power, but feels honestly just more like an everyday car, you definitely want to check something like this out.
It's going to be a strange comparison, but it feels more like a town car. And that's one of those things where if you have a lot of weight that's evenly, spread out, it's kind of easier to spring that, because it's going to be a more consistent thing. Earlier this week, we were driving heavy duty trucks, not a one-to-one comparison, but those drive better when they're weighted down. And that's just kind of what this suspension feels like. It's that it's got the weight balance to handle what it needs to be doing, and there's some firmness built into that, and that's how it's as fun to drive as it can be.
Now, the downside obviously to the curb weight is going to be grip, and we don't find as much grip in here as you would find in something lighter. There's just no way around that. But that's not to say that this feels like a wet noodle out on the road. It feels, large and heavy, but you can have a surprising amount of fun on roads like this. Now, what's interesting about the motor setup in this is that even though we have the bigger motor up front, that doesn't mean this is always going to be front power biased. On this particular road, which is definitely very windy, you can have a surprising amount of fun in the Equinox, because, especially when we get into these corners here and you start power on in the corner, exiting the corner there, it's obvious that Cadillac is dialing up the power to the rear motor a little bit more than they're dialing up the front motor. So even though this doesn't have that same rear power bias that we find in a GV60, it doesn't exactly feel like a front-wheel drive Cadillac either. Exiting the corners, it's not going to get tail happy like an electric Camaro might, but it's still an awful lot of fun, and it feels more stable and more planted than simply a front-wheel drive EV, or something like a BZ4X or a Subaru Solterra, which definitely don't assign as much power to the rear motor as we find in this. Perhaps the best thing about the Optiq is its price tag, and this is where it has a significant advantage over a wide range of the competition. $54,390 including destination is where this is going to start, and if you get carried away with options, it can only go up to around $61,000 currently. We probably will see other models in the future, but for the moment, this is a narrower and lower pricing range than a lot of its direct competition, not just from the Europeans, but from some of the Korean brands as well. This also qualifies for the full $7,500 tax credit because it's built in North America, and General Motors has been really cautious and careful with where the battery materials, minerals, and components are coming from. And that means that as long as that tax credit lasts, this is going to qualify for it, and you can just take $7,500 right off the top of that price tag. That interestingly means the price tag of this Optiq is going to be pretty close in terms of starting price to the average new car transaction in North America. That's something that has shocked a lot of people, but it makes sense because the very closely related Chevy Equinox EV is one of the more affordable vehicles, not just in the electric segment, but with that tax credit in North America, period. And this is right in that same vein. Now, the performance, that is not where we find something like the GV60 or the GV70 from Genesis, or some of the electric options from the European competitors. 300 horsepower is definitely fun, but because of the curb weight that we find in the Optic, thanks to the design of this electric platform, it is a little on the heavy side, and its front-wheel drive nature, it's not going to be the same kind of fun as we find in those other options. General Motors went in this very pragmatic direction though, because the front motor is going to be doing all the regen braking for you. So it does make sense for the bigger motor to be up front for that. And of course, if you're in an area that gets snow, ice, etc., you probably want extra traction on the front axle. Of course, if you want more power, Cadillac has the new Lyriq V, and that definitely has more of a rear power bias. So that's probably the other thing to know, is that Cadillac just has a bunch of different options around. If this is too small, if it's not powerful enough, there's the Lyriq. If you want 3 rows, there's the Optiq. If you want someone driving around in the back of your shot, there is this Audi that has decided to drive through a puddle for no particular reason because he is an asshole and he's now on camera. The Optic is a decent deal if you're looking for something that's comfortable, quiet on the inside, definitely faster than the average Cadillac, but you don't need rear-wheel drive. You don't want to do donuts in the parking lot. That's what this is all about, and I think there's certainly a place for that in America, because if you want something sportier, again, there are other things to choose. Let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below, and hopefully you are staying nice and dry and warm at home, because tomorrow we will be driving the new Escalade IQ in the pouring rain. If you haven't seen that video, it's going to be dropping very shortly, so stay tuned for that.